everybody. How are you? Hope you're having a good morning. So as you know, my name is Melissa Kantor, and I am at the LEGO Group responsible for people, data, insights, and our HR technology infrastructure. Prior to LEGO, I built the group-wide people analytics function for the Prudential Group, which is a large asset manager and insurer in the City of London. Today I'm going to talk about how to embed a people analytics function. And I'm going to talk about some things related to influence and emotional intelligence and capability building, and ultimately talk about how all these things can be tied together to ensure we have strong influence coming out of our function. So we're going to talk first about influence. Now, a lot of people have a lot of different definitions from influence. Some are a bit negative, for example, trying to get someone to react the way you want them to react, which you might interpret as some sort of manipulation. I like to think of influence as inspiring others to take action. And you might want to think about what on earth does influence have to do with data and analytics? Well, I would argue that my entire function exists to influence our board and our executive leaders to make decisions. Whether it's giving basic HRMI about the current state of the business, whether it's understanding our trends and trying to predict the future. We're also trying to look through everything through the lenses of influence, so trying to understand what is it we're trying to learn from the information that we have. How do we want people to react when they see it? How do I want my business partners to react when they see information? What action do I want them to take with the senior leaders they're engaging with in the business? When I produce a report for the board, how do I want them to feel when they see that report? What action do I want them to take? What discussions do I want that to elicit? Many often, I'm sure we've all done this, we put together a dashboard, has 30 measures on there, we throw in everything but the kitchen sink, 20 filters, and we hope to God our CFO is going to know how to manipulate those numbers to see the interesting bits of information. And of course, it doesn't work that way. So our function has to take it the next step further. We need to go through that level of analysis to understand and interpret what is the important information that needs to go to the various populations within our organization. And then we need to make sure we interpret and storyboard it appropriately. I'm going to talk a bit about how to do that. So we're going to talk about emotional change management, which I promise you is not very fluffy on a talk that's meant to be about data analytics. We as humans are hardwired to accept influence from our emotions. And what we need to do is somehow connect that emotions back to the raw data that we're providing. And it sounds like a leap of faith, but bear with me for a few minutes and I'm going to take you through that journey. This is a basic emotional competency model. You would have seen it in any organizational psych class. In order to influence with someone, you have to emotionally connect with them. To emotionally connect, you have to manage your own emotions, and to manage your own emotions, you have to be emotionally aware. Now, we all know about that about ourselves. I would argue as a function, we need to work through that model. And I'm going to talk you through that today. So emotional connection is empathy. That's generally an accepted definition for emotional connection. What that means when we're talking about two people is that we can understand each other. We don't have to agree with each other, but we can understand each other. And with that, you build a rapport that you can start to have discussions and influence. When it comes to a business function, it means that as a function, our people analytics function needs to identify with and understand the other functions within the business. And I'm largely referring to my finance colleagues who also have a reporting function. And anyone who's had numerous discussions 2 days before the board report on finalizing headcount numbers will understand what I mean, how difficult that can be sometimes. We need to make sure that we as individuals can partner with our colleagues in finance, IT, and other parts of the business. We also have to make sure that as a function, we establish our credibility, and we do that by, as a function, understanding in detail the purposes of what the other functions and intent of other functions within the organization. And I'm going to walk this back in a few more slides to talk about why it's really important as a function we're very clear on our purpose and intent, not just from within the world of people analytics, but within our peer functions across the business as well. Emotional management as authenticity. Now, if we walk further down our track and steps around emotional management, we see that the next step after emotional connections is emotional management, which is managing yourself basically and understanding your own emotions. And I define that as authenticity, just being authentic, seeking to understand and making sure that you're understood, and always having integrity, which I would define as consistency. We need to do this ourselves, but again, if you look at this through the lens of a business function, We, within people analytics or in any other analytics function, need to operate in the same way. We need to make sure that we are consistent in everything we do and our approaches to everything. Consistent in the definition of headcount and how we calculate that number. It should be delivered consistently in all reports and all levels of the organization, for example. And self-awareness as cognizance. Basically, just understanding our own feelings. And I know it sounds funny for a data analytics person to talk about understanding our own feelings. But if we can't understand our own feelings, we can't personally work up our own emotional ladder. If you extrapolate that to a function needs to understand its feelings. And what that means is, as a function, what are your values? What is your purpose? What is your mission statement? Is everyone in your function bought into that and comfortable articulating it? Can you articulate that with your peers within the organization outside of your function? And do other functions understand what your purpose is? Within the world of people analytics, it's a very, very new field called people analytics. Obviously, HR reporting's been around for a long, long time. But a lot of people think that the analytics function specifically exists to do things it may or may not do. Are you there to do basic HRMI? Are there employees out there that are afraid you're going to do some sort of savvy analytics and make them redundant because they no longer perform it? There's a lot of interesting things that come up when you start talking about embedding and moving a people analytics function forward. Okay, so I promise that's the end of the fluffy stuff. But I did want to take you on a journey through this concept of an emotional competency model and how it ultimately results in influence. And how as a function, if we're trying to build an insights function with proper insights where you really want people to take action, your function needs to be respected and needs to be able to have the credibility to drive influence at the highest levels in the organization. So that's one piece of embedding a people analytics function, is making sure that you are setting yourselves up for success with influence by understanding how you as an individual within that function relate to your peers across the organization, but also how the function you're building relates to all the peers across an organization. The next bit I want to talk about is data literacy. And there's a few slides on this. A show of hands, how many people think data literacy is about using Excel? Running statistical analysis. I get very, very frustrated. Time and again, I go into organizations that say, I need to help improve data literacy. Teach my HR business partners how to do statistics in Excel. That is not data literacy by any stretch of the imagination at all. And I'm going to talk you through that model. Here's a sample of some charts. I hope we're all relatively familiar with these. They're pie graphs and bar charts. You've probably seen them. And I would argue most people are comfortable with using these sorts of charts. Then you have someone like me come in, and we're going to do some people analytics for you, and 2 years later, you're looking at this. Does that make sense to anyone? Absolutely not. I don't even know what some of those things mean. A lot of times we make an industry out of visualizations these days. It's all the new word. Let's create something savvy, something someone else has never seen before. And no one understands it. If you show a report to your board and their initial reaction is, okay, what am I looking at? You've missed your mark. And I've done it. I'll put my hand up. I'm sure a lot of people who do visualizations have done it. You think it's cool, you think it's simple, but it's really only cool and simple for the data geek in the corner who crunched all the numbers, who actually knows what they're looking at already. So I would argue, always keep it simple. And I always produce charts with just these types of graphs on them now. Eventually, maybe over time, we'll evolve and use a bit more, but we have to keep it simple, especially if you're reporting to board and executives. So what really is data literacy? It's the ability to drive employees to bring meaningful insights to data, which is why the most important people on my team are the data interpreters and storyboarders. They are the ones that make the link between the hard data scientists and our HR business partners and the broader business. They're the ones that have to do the interpretations, and those are the ones that have to do the storyboarding. And I would argue, as we're doing at LEGO now, we just kicked off a huge initiative to upskill our HR population in data literacy. And what we're starting with is understanding and interpreting charts and graphs. We don't expect them to make charts and graphs at all. That is not their point. They want to go for it. But their business, what the value they bring is interpreting the data to meet the needs of their business. The value our business partners bring is, Melissa, this doesn't look so right for turnover in India. Can you please drill down and do a bit more further in-depth analysis to it? They bring the business context that can help us storyboard and really interpret the data appropriately. So data literacy is not about Excel at all. And I would argue if you're new in people analytics, to really start with the basics, with a clear alignment and understanding of terms and concepts. Have a really clear taxonomy. Simple question, going back to headcount. There are so many different definitions of headcount. Planned baseline headcount, costed headcount, seats on bums, empty seats. Everyone uses these terms interchangeably. Within your organization, you need to have a clear taxonomy across your function within HR, but also across your colleagues in finance and other parts of the business to use the same terms consistently. Just that, well, you'll see a step change in data literacy as everyone's talking about the same thing. There's no more confusion. How come my number doesn't match your number? Well, the numbers are correct, but you're using different definitions. I think all of us have wasted so much time. I know I've personally wasted so much time working through those sorts of things. Agreeing on key data and measures. So often when we try to do a people analytics function, we want to receive it well, we think more information is better. So we put together a 50-page dashboard that we send out to our executive team. We put everything in there, every measure we can think of. We build a dashboard, and I had one I saw the other day that I kid you not had 30 different filters on the left column. That is not helpful. That is not at all going to help people analytics to embed well, because no one's going to know how to filter what they need to do. The value of an analytics team is pre-doing those filters, is thinking through what is the key bits of information that's relevant and socializing that out in a way that's understandable. Now, those key data points and measures may evolve over time. Simple ones, headcount, turnover, performance. I mean, those are the big themes you see all the time. But there could be some niche ones that come out there, depending on where your business is. As I mentioned before, I came from Prudential. We had a big push on gender equality for our senior leadership team. So one of the key measures that we looked at was gender equality or inequality in our successor pools into senior leadership positions. That was one of the key measures we looked at every month, every quarter, and every year. And it can evolve over time, but the most important thing is these 4 or 5, 7 key measures. You look at them, you understand them, you socialize them, and you use them well. So instead of looking at data literacy from a broad perspective, oh, what's all these different sorts of measures we can use, pick a few and go really deep enough to challenge, so that if you have 2 different business partners or a business partner speaking with a finance colleague, they know the specifics of that particular measure really, really well and can challenge each other back and forth on it. And that brings some really interesting discussions and instant credibility. Try not to do too much. Keep it simple, but what you do really well, in depth, and at high quality. And of course, always go back to your analytics team. The whole point of having an analytics team is to crunch the numbers and do the heavy lifting. So I always tell my business partners and my colleagues in HR and finance and across the business, if they see some data that doesn't look right, ask us to look into it. If you have a hypothesis, I think our high potentials are leaving because of this certain manager, for example, I'm making it up, come to your analytics team. We'll see if we can find some information to support that. The one watch out I would have is anyone who's worked with data knows you can pick a measure to support anything you want to do in the business. And I think we've all been asked to find data to back up a decision that's already been made. And that's really hard when you're put in that really awkward position. And what I would urge and stress is when you are asked to provide information, look at holistically. You have to try to look at the data and see what most measures tell you and pick the ones that you believe give the most realistic interpretation of the data for the business. It's easier said than done when you have a bunch of chief executives that have already made a decision and they're looking for some backup. And the next one is around credibility building. So when we have a people analytics function, obviously we need to deliver information that will be used to make key business decisions. We want that information to be actionable. And we talked about building our function in a way that will enable it to interact with other functions and yourselves within people analytics with your peers in a way that works up the emotional competency model that sets you up for success in terms of influencing people. And we talked about data literacy. Don't bite off more than you can chew. Keep it simple and go really deep on those few simple things. The next step then is to make sure that you bring instant credibility when you walk into the room. You don't want to walk into the room with headcount numbers and have your finance colleague walking in with a different number, and then you lose credibility. Both of you do. So I would define credibility building as making sure you're consistent definitions, consistent numbers, across all the different sorts of reports that you use. Obviously, accuracy. You have to make sure your information is correct. And you know what? Oftentimes it's not, and it's okay, but then you have to footnote it and say plus or minus 5%, or this is the information we have based on X, Y, and Z things. I think there's a hypothesis or theory out there that says you have to have perfect data to get good insights. I can tell you today there is no such thing as perfect data. You need good enough data to generate some really good insights. But where you don't have perfect data, you do need to declare that and disclose that information. It has to be dependable, which means if you're producing information, you need to be able to do it on a cadence that makes sense for the business, whether it's weekly, monthly, quarterly, and you need to deliver. You can't be late, you can't miss it, you can't have a tech glitch. All of that lessens your credibility to deliver. You need to come into a sustainable cadence with the information you're providing. And it has to be relevant. I think earlier I said, so many of us create dashboards with everything but the kitchen sink and publish it once a month and hope to God something lands somewhere that resonates with someone. That doesn't work very well at all. And it's a recipe for a disaster when an executive will say, we're spending so much money on this savvy analytics solution and we're not getting any insights from it. You really have to make sure you spend the time within your team to understand the data and pick out the key themes that you're seeing and storyboard them and articulate them in a way that can be consumed by your business leaders. And oftentimes the analytics teams can't do that in a vacuum. You have to partner with your business partners to co-author storyboarding. That's really, really important. And it has to be timely. No one really cares about attrition from 5 years ago, right? I know that there's month-end reporting, year-end reporting, but if you spend the bulk of your time working on numbers that are 6 months out of date, by the time you produce your actionable insights, the business has evolved, and not much can happen, especially in this day and age. So you have to make sure it's timely. And if you don't have the information, you can't do it timely, then think about what you can do timely that makes sense. There's all these different sorts of competing factors when it comes up to picking and choosing those key measures that are really important for your business. If attrition is really, really important, but you don't have the infrastructure in place only to report what attrition was 18 months ago, it's not going to be very helpful. So you need to think about holistically where you are as an organization and what makes sense to look at and how best to look at it. And the last one is this concept of influence by design. And this is new. I think we've all heard of privacy by design, security by design. I don't think a lot of us are yet familiar with the concept of influence by design. What that means is when you're building an analytics function, we all know it exists to do reporting. We all know it exists to do dashboards. Great, lovely stuff. How are you going to use that and how are you going to consume that information? You need to think about structuring everything you do from a people analytics function perspective, an HR reporting perspective, with the end game of trying to influence various stakeholders within your organization. And you need to look at that through the lens from whether it's a board of director member, whether it's an HR business partner, whether it's a line manager or your average people manager out there, and make sure that the information you provide to them is in a way that's usable and simple, in a way that they can understand it, in a way that tells the business story. It's really, really important. Many, many times we don't put any thought into the art of influence, and it's not a science. Looking at the data is the science. But true people analytics comes back to the basis of it's an art and a science. You have the raw data, which is the science, and then the art form for how do you storyboard that information? How do you use that to influence people? How do you get a dashboard to make some sort of emotional connection with someone who sees the information? And there's simple ways to do that. Gamification is one. We've all seen a heat map. How many of us see a heat map? And if we see our project red, our tummies blanch. That's an emotional connection. There's all these little tools and tips and tricks that you can do to make sure that the reports and information that you're sharing does trigger a response. And then you can have a discussion, and it triggers people to action. So that's it. I wanted to leave about 10 minutes at the end for any questions or discussions. None at all? Has anyone here built a people analytics function or been part of one before?
Sorry, I just wanted to say, no, we definitely don't have an analytics function, but we are trying to use metrics to the best of our capability. But certainly when it comes to creating that visual side, I think that's where we struggle. Yeah. So you don't just have a load of graphs, a load of bar charts. How do we make it look slightly more visually appealing? appealing so that it hits, like you say, with that emotional trigger.
Yeah.
We've tried heat maps, but then it's just a lot of data on the same page.
It's really hard.
Yeah.
It really depends on the business and how they're used to consuming information. Sometimes, Prudential, for example, they love their heat maps. Everything was a heat map. It drove me absolutely batty. But you'll find who your stakeholders are and what resonates with them. I think keeping it simple is great. Sometimes you can do some, whizzy things with colors and graphics. You can record things now with an overtone, and we did that for one of our dashboards. So some of the newer analytics solutions, you can actually build a little movie storyboard, and that really helped. Especially at Lego now, you put little Lego minifigures in it, which is just good fun. Way more fun. You have Darth Vader coming on telling you to look at your performance rating metrics. It's brilliant, brilliant stuff. But it's really hard, especially sometimes it can be dry content as well.
Yeah.
I think the way you get the hook is you have to show them information that they're really interested in. And a lot of times, headcount and attrition, we have to report on it. It's not interesting. People just flip over it.
Yeah.
And you know what? We accept, that's fine. Flip over it. If you need to look at it, we'll make it bright red in the report and make sure you read it. So I think you need to understand kind of the maturity model. And that's not the right word. Maybe where the interests lie, the various stakeholders who are looking at the report. And then also pick and choose the measures that you think are going to be most interesting for them to see.
And that's a key takeaway for me. Thank you, because I think it's so easy to just deliver everything.
Deliver everything. And I've seen so many dashboards, and I've built so many dashboards that are absolutely useless in retrospect. But they're good for the data scientists who are maybe doing the data discovery to find the insights, but they're not good as to be consumed for your end user, whoever that's going to be, whether it's a business partner or an executive.
Yeah. How do we influence the people who do the data analytics? The people, because so I think that we are in the place that you said we shouldn't be, as in we just get so much data, and I work for the prison service, so you can imagine the amount of data on offenders, on staff, and all sorts, and you just end up with a big dashboard with loads of and lots of graphs with loads of lines all over it. So what we don't have, I don't think, is the approach that you're taking about keep it simple. You're analysing it behind the scenes, I suppose. How would you suggest we influence a team of people who do all that stuff to give us what we need, and who can look at it and do the science of it?
It's an excellent question, and I think it determines how you structure your function. And there's two ways to do that. One is whoever's doing that analysis will come up with 50 measures. That's their job, is to crunch all the numbers and come up with all these incredible measures. It's generally a data interpreter or a storyboarder who then consumes that 50-some measures and says, okay, what's really interesting this month? Is everything tracking the way it should? What isn't? What needs to be lifted out and put on that first page that everyone sees? And then you can bury those 50 measures in an appendix for the one data geek who's probably in the room who is going to read all that stuff. There's someone like that in every board. But you need to lift up the important stuff on the first page. I think the second way to do it is if you have an HR partnering model, we actually have an HR partner who sits with us and goes through the final deck before we publish it. And we've never not changed it based on that person's feedback. It's really interesting because the HR business partners are much, much closer to the business than we as data folks are. And the marriage between the two of us can be really, really helpful because they're right on the line. They know exactly what the pulse of the organization is, what they're interested in, and what they're not, quite frankly. And they can help us steer and position which measures deserve to be elevated above the others.
Yeah, that's good advice. I think that's what we miss. We don't have that storyboarder or that person who's helping that team of people who are very analytical to actually, they don't know what they need to present.
Yeah, it's brand new in the HR world. Where it's very rare. If you look for someone who's an HR storyboarder, you probably won't find them. I mean, that job didn't exist, a year or two even ago. And if you're lucky, you'll find someone who might come from a strong data science background, but is savvy enough to understand and pick out the nuances for the business. Or you might have someone, an HR business partner, who maybe is a bit of a tech geek underneath it all and can work with the data scientist to help pull it together. But you absolutely need that skill set that I would call data interpretation and storyboarding. And that skill set is my definition of what it means to be data literate from an HR business partner perspective, is they can help interpret and storyboard. They shouldn't be the ones crunching Excel or crunching the measures or doing any of that stuff. They should be helping consume that measure and what it means for the business.
wondered if you had any lessons learned or any advice on operating with quite a lot of different data sources. Because I think quite a lot of the things you were talking about in terms of consistency and standards absolutely get that. I wondered if there was anything else that you'd talk about.
Yeah, so I can give a great example from when I was at the Prudential Group, which is a large global insurer. We have 30-some executives, chief executive officers within the Prudential Group. Each of those chief executive officers is empowered to run their business as appropriate, which means we run every core HRIS under the sun. We have data models all over the place. And there's two ways to do it. Kind of the hard way, which is you force everyone to use a standard data model, which maybe makes sense if you're a big top-run organization, you can mandate out from the top. If you're not, that doesn't work very well. So what we did is we come up with what we call kind of a group master data definition. And we mapped everything from the local business unit definitions into the group-wide master data system. So a great example, like nationality. Great example. So we have a master group-wide nationality data definition. And we mapped every single definition we had to that one nationality. And I picked that one because obviously, in America, you might have nationality as UK. Here in the UK, you might have nationalities of, Scottish, Welsh, English, and being able to map them all so we understand when we say UK what it means. And we did that for approximately 50 key definitions and data items. We didn't have to do it for everything, just the ones we were interested in measuring. And then every time we fed data into the solution, we did it on a monthly basis, a monthly snapshot we consumed from the business units. Everything was automatically mapped to that group-wide definition for group-wide reporting. Now, the downside is if I do that and I run, let's say, a turnover analysis or attrition analysis, I'll come up with a number. Now, everyone knows turnover and attrition maths actually differ by geography. So Asia-Pac tends to use one set of calculations, Europe a different, and America's a different set, which means from a group-wide perspective, I could calculate a turnover rate for my colleagues in China, and it's not the turnover rate that they're using in reporting to the regulators. So there are watch-outs that you need to understand. You need to be very clear and take caveats that from a group-wide perspective, here's our reporting. We're allowing for local nuances, and where needed, we will enable our local, for example, HR requirements to override our group-wide requirements. But it's not ideal, and it's a lot of work. But once you get there, it's brilliant. It's a lot of good insights you can get. Thank you. Yeah. Any questions? We have just a few minutes left. Excellent. I think that's it then.